I can't believe you're a professional golfer. I think you should be working at the snack bar.
You better relax, Bob.
There is no way that you could have been as bad at hockey as you are at golf.
All right, let's go.
Oh! You like that, old man? You want a piece of me? I don't want a piece of you. I want the whole thing. Oh!
All right, everybody, welcome back to another week of Muskies on Tap. Welcome to episode number 81 here. I'm one of your hosts here tonight, Gus Manti. We got the other two Mott members, hosts on here tonight as well, and we'll be bringing to you shortly an interview we just had with Ryan McMahon out of the Twin Cities metro area, kind of all over Minnesota as well. And we had an awesome chat with him. Hopefully you guys enjoy that. But before I go any further, let's introduce the others on here tonight. And let's introduce Brian here first tonight. So Brian, how are you doing?
I'm doing terrific. I think I already had an early introduction during the interview because I showed up a little bit late tonight. But yeah, very, very excited for this weekend. We got the last dance, the final showing for us three in the boat this year. And we're doing it in a little bit of an away game for Gus and I, traveling over to the rival state, Minnesota. A little bit of a homecoming for me. Used to live out there. It's gonna be fun to drive back into town and then keep going west, get the hell out of that city. Looking forward to fishing Minnetonka. Heard a lot of great things about it. Max has been out there a handful of times, so he'll kind of be the dual guide in the boat with Gus. Max, how you doing tonight? I know you love this lake that we're fishing this weekend.
Love might be a little bit of an overstatement, but I am very, very excited to have you guys come and spend a few days over here. Should be a good time. Like you said, last dance, fellas are getting together for one more trip, trying to make it happen. Can we salvage the fall as a boat collective? That's going to be the question that needs to be answered here this weekend. I think we're going to be up for the task. We got some good weather ahead of us. I know many of you probably at this point in the year are probably sitting out in the woods, but for those of you who are still braving the elements, um, we went over a lot of good information with Ryan here in the interview. You guys are going to enjoy this one. I know I did recording it. Funny enough, we've really been lacking on the Facebook posts, and ever since we made that group, and I put out a little status just asking who's still fishing, whatnot. I wanted to feature him on the podcast. Was not anticipating there to end up being, damn near 100 comments of people writing in. It seems like a lot of people that are tuning in are still out there fishing. So yeah, a lot of nice fish being caught. I think it just like gave me some motivation to get back out there again. I think this time of year it gets a little bit more difficult, after a long season with the weather and everything. But I'm rejuvenated, ready to go. Really excited to have you fellas back in town. But yeah, before we hit this interview, we should highlight Gus. You got out on the water. Something happened today. You want to talk
Mhm.
about it real quick before we dive in the interview?
Sure thing, yeah. Overall the fall's been good. I know like you said, the boat with the three of us has been a little tough this fall on getting some fish to go, but I took a little time off of fishing there in mid-November, had my last guide trip around, I think it was like the 9th or 10th or something like that, and fished another day or two, and then took a 7, 8 days off and came back to some warm weather again, and got out in the boat just a little bit in the afternoons with dad, and we just trolled, and I'm like, man, this bite's tough again. Like I don't like this warm weather, but we saw this front coming in, tomorrow when this podcast drops, I think throughout the whole Midwest it's going to be just gale force winds like 22 to 25 with gusts up to like 40, 45. I think I even saw some I was looking at the future on Ventusky and I saw like 50-mile-an-hour gusts in like some of the lower Midwest, like Illinois and stuff area. It looked pretty sketchy, but that's just tomorrow. But I'm like, okay, the temp's dropping, like the bite's gonna be good. We could have picked somewhere to troll, but I'm like, Dad had an opportunity at one suckerfish earlier in the fall. Unfortunately, we didn't boat that one, and then he hasn't since. We've mainly been trolling a lot, so I'm like, he wanted to suckerfish really badly. I definitely was getting a little more fired up looking at the weather, and we set out to a lake where um actually we've never caught one before, but the only fish we've ever seen or seen on electronics are very large. It's a little bit more off the beaten path lake, and we decided like screw it. Let's get some suckers, let's head there and give it our best shot. And it took a while. We were marking bait all day, and we maybe marked two muskies, to go back on. We had some areas that, from just the previous couple times checking the lake out and not boating any, but seeing some and seeing some nice ones. We knew some areas where they should be, and we saw some, it was a Cisco-based lake. We saw some Cisco's staging, some really high up, some 10, 15 feet down, and it's just one of those things where it's like, man, it's a low density lake. You just never know, like it's gonna happen at like a random time. And lo and behold, we went back on one of the two fish we had waypointed, and it was just like textbook. It was a late follow. It had to have been the way it was coming by side image. We were going along just a basic break line, from deep water up into shallow water that had weeds, and immediately hit the sucker. It was textbook. Had it only like 10 feet down and some pretty deep water, like 20, 25 feet of water, and screamed a line. Everything textbook at first, and then all of a sudden, like it started moving. It didn't just take line one direction. It started like cutting to the left and going towards the bobber sucker. We had to, mess around with that and, take the rods and pull them over each other and stuff like that so they didn't get tangled. And during this, I noticed the line was coming up a little bit more, and I'm like, because I'm trying to hold on to the sucker rod, but by also keeping the bail open and not getting anything tangled in the trolling motor. And it comes to the surface, and like it still has the sucker and it's making commotion, and then it goes back down. And I'm looking and I'm like, all right, it's not, it's I couldn't really tell. It's dark out, it's really cloudy. It's about to snow. I'm like, in my head, I'm like, oh, that's like a 40, 42 or something like that. So I didn't really say anything, whether it was big or small, to Dad. But once we got set up and I knew that I was going back down, we found the direction it was going. We got right over the top of it. I'm like, all right, now's the time. And he set the hook, and it just like laid into a stump. And I'm like, oh, hell yeah, this is awesome. This is what you want to have happen after, sucker fishing, which um to fast forward into this podcast, with Ryan, we go, full detail, full in depth on sucker fishing. So, if you want to get fired up about sucker fishing, definitely stay until, the second half of the pod, I think is when we mainly talk about it. But anyways, we get this in the net, and, it wasn't like one of those super insanely plump fish, but it was definitely very, very healthy. It was not skinny. It just didn't have that, pot belly that you'd usually see, but it was an old fish, war horse, big head, and I'm looking at it on the net. Dad's previous personal best was a 45 incher, and I'm like, all right, Dad, I think we're working with something here. Like, I think this is 45, something like that. It's knocking on your PB door, and set up the video camera and so that we can take a picture together. And I pull it out of the net and slap it on the board, and that thing just it kept coming out of the net. It was curling in the net. I couldn't really tell. It was dark, snowing by now, and it hit that 4 foot mark. So Dad joined the Wisconsin 4 foot club now with his
Ooh, let's
personal
go.
That's
best. So
awesome.
shout out
That's
Rich.
awesome.
Shout out.
Shout out.
And that was a great moment. I knew that if we would get one to finally fall and eat something, a bait, a trolling lure, a sucker, whatever, on this particular lake, I've been telling Max, Dad, and stuff that like it's gonna be a big one, and I was pretty pumped to see that it was a big one. So knocked off another lake on the list up here. in the Vilas Oneida County area. So pretty
What number
stoked
you
on
on?
that.
What number you on now, Gus?
A number of lakes.
Yeah.
Um, Off the top of my head, I could try and I'm just speaking out loud as I look up because I have it. I think it's 64 with this one in 4 years, 3.5, 4 years fishing up here, and that's like I can't remember what it is. I think if you break it down, like 10 or 12 of them are out of Vilas Oneida County area. Otherwise, all of them are right up here. Never been to Canada yet, so it's been Iowa, Illinois, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan, and Kentucky. Those are the states. So
Nice.
knocking
Checking
them
boxes.
down.
That's awesome. All right. Well, fellas, I'm excited to host you this weekend. Hopefully we'll have a good recap for you guys here next week. But in the meantime, enjoy our interview here with Ryan. It's a good one. Gus, fired up.
Yeah, will do. All right, here on the line tonight, we got Ryan McMahon out of the Twin Cities area, and we're going to be chatting about kind of whatever's on the table, wherever this podcast goes. We're just going to see where it goes from start to finish. We'll, of course, start with your background, like an introduction, Ryan, for the people, for those that don't know you, but you've been around this muskie game for a long, long time. So before we get any further, how are you doing tonight, Ryan?
Not too bad, guys. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, I braved some of the first winter elements of the year on the road to get home and join the call with you guys. So I'm glad I'm safe and sound at my in my basement right now and glad to be talking muskies.
Yeah, that got gnarly out there today. I was like experiencing rush hour traffic times 10 again out of nowhere. It's like everyone forgot how to drive in the snow. This is wild.
Yeah, it always takes a couple. It always takes a couple snowfalls. I wasn't really expecting it either. I was, I guess, dumb enough to trust my weather app, and I thought we were just getting a couple flurries, but it was starting to get a little gnarly there in the evening. So
Yeah,
yeah,
it's good to see. I mean, we've had a really weird fall, so glad to see winter is actually gonna come knocking here shortly.
Did it
But
stick at all by you guys? Because we got a little
yeah,
flurry action here too, just not
oh yeah,
much. It did?
yeah.
Oh,
I'm looking at a light dusting, I would say.
nice.
Moderate dusting. Yeah. So like Gus said, let's dive into the background here. I'm sure everybody that's listening probably is very familiar with you, but always good to just kind of hear how it all got started for you in the Muskie game. So take us back and how'd you get into this really fun sport?
yeah. Well, yeah, I've been guiding around Minnesota, since about 2010, and started out. Well, as we were chatting in the green room here before we hit the record button, I I started out, just advertising to guide in the Twin Cities. That's where I live. That's where I felt like ought to be advertising and guiding. And then as I kind of built a name for myself a little bit more, then it became more not as much Twin Cities Muskie, but McMahon's Muskie Guide Service, and we kind of started going around the state a little bit more and chasing bites a little bit more. But I started out fishing muskies and kind of got bit by the muskie bug. I had my two good buddies, that were buddies growing up and still good buddies to this day. They each had cabins on muskie lakes, one on Bone Lake in western Wisconsin, and the other one on Pelican Lake out by Detroit Lakes. So, was really lucky and fortunate to be able to go up and just kind of slack off and, we'd fish for bass or walleyes for a little bit. And then, we always kind of kept gravitating back towards muskies and, sooner or later, I mean, just like everybody that gets bit by the muskie bug, it takes hold of you and, and you can't stop thinking about it. And then I got this crazy idea to start trying to take people's money to take them out and and catch a muskie. So and here we are, quite a few years later, and the phone still rings every once in a while. So
That's good. How did so when you got that bite, let's talk about that first bite. How did you get your first muskie, if you can remember? I know for some people it's vivid and some people it's
Man, you're making
hazy,
him sound like he's 75 years old, Gus.
Well,
uh,
I know my first one's
no, I
hazy.
mean
I still can't remember.
well, what's funny about that is there was kind of like, so my two buddies, Jim on Bone Lake and Scott on Pelican Lake, we're all three of us are good buddies, and so Bone Lake was much different because there was more of like a musky culture, and it was kind of before. I mean, we're talking like in the late '90s. Um, there really wasn't much musky pressure. I mean, the fish had been stocked in the lakes around the Twin Cities, but I feel like a lot of the musky fishing pressure, a lot of the guys from the Twin Cities, they really went to bone and deer. That's what you would always hear: bone and deer, bone and deer. And those guys or a lot of guys would be up there fishing, on the weekend, like the weekend warriors and stuff. And so there just you saw more musky fishermen. There was a neighbor, Bob Boyd, who taught us a lot of stuff up there and taught us how to fish bucktails through cabbage and all kinds of good stuff. And my buddy Jim, he's kind of a prick. He would always be in the front of the boat. He'd always catch them all. And he finally let me get one up there at some point, and I'd caught some little ones and stuff, but then on Pelican Lake, we knew, I guess we maybe knew, I mean, we're younger, right? But like, we knew that they'd been stocked or something, I don't know, but we started catching these spotted fish. It was almost like we didn't know for sure what they were. I mean, we're younger, or whatever, 14 years old or something, and they just looked so much different. It looked like somebody tried to stab them to death with a black magic marker. And so we're catching these little guys, and then all of a sudden, like, 3-footers and 40-inchers started showing up, and really a lot of those were caught just on bass spinners, or we would speed troll, big weed flats and stuff. We'd kind of like bigger rapalas and stuff. So it was kind of like, a little bit of a soft intro into musky fishing, just, kind of chipping away at some little ones there. And then we started taking it a little bit more serious, as we got, out of high school and, kind of that college years and stuff, we would go up to Pelican and start fishing in the fall and catching bigger fish. So
It's hilarious. So what was going like? Do you even do you remember thinking back to that, like when you caught that first spotted fish and like, what the hell is this? Like, were you guys thinking it was like, this for sure is a muskie, right? Like it looks like a muskie, but it's just got a whole different paint job than the Wisconsin, greenies that you're catching on bone.
Well, so I remember one, and I don't know. I mean, I probably like 16, 15, 16, something like that. I remember catching one, and I think it was just like in the morning or something. I was walking down some neighbors' docks and just casting a husky jerk, trying to catch some bass or something. Probably waiting for everybody else to get out of bed or something. And a muskie. Actually, I think Scott was with me. Something hit, and it just freaked out. And it was like, before you knew it, this thing was up on shore in somebody's riprap, like up in the rocks, like freaking out and shaking. And it was like, it just moved so quick. It was like you couldn't even see the thing, and it was so mental. It was all of a sudden, it blew my mind. It was just like this thing, these things are charged up. And yeah, and then we just started thinking about it a little bit more, and it seemed, those two lakes really lay out differently. Bone Lake, we'd basically dock fish. You'd go around and you'd cast little bucktails at docks, and this is before mapping and stuff on these lakes, I mean, I think maybe they had the Garmin H2O handheld GPSs. Probably not at that point, or at least we didn't have them. We didn't have them till probably closer to like 2000. But anyways, yeah, it was, it kind of was, it was a daunting thought to go out and try to like pick apart weed edges on Pelican Lake. At the time, it was, it felt like an ocean to us. So we would troll a lot out there. We would troll, or we go and fish like steep sand breaks and stuff where you could really see, the breaks well, and just kind of feel your way down them.
Yeah, we had Mike Kramer on our podcast a couple months back, and he was telling us about when they started to discover, mapping and actually getting some electronics over on that western Minnesota lakes, how just kind of the quick ramp up from like what they were or thought they knew to like when all that technology got introduced into musky fishing, it was like, holy shit, like this lake looks, crazy different.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, you'd have, it would go from basically a joke of a base map to then it would, you'd have like 5 foot contours, and they'd be off, and then they'd be a little, then you get the next version and be a little bit more accurate. And then finally Lake Master just like, nailed it. They actually had people go out and map everything out with 1 foot contours. And it was like such a, just like a aha moment where you can finally see what this stuff looks like, that you've been trying to figure out, and just the extra little, outside corners and inside turns that you didn't know. And, now you can work those spots perfectly. And yeah, I mean, well, that was like our advent of, almost like, the live scope nowadays. That was, I mean, just having the mapping back in the day was like, it felt like cheating almost.
Yeah, I bet it'd be so much fun. Like when you first got that first piece of, electronics that actually had that capability. Like I even remember when we got, side imaging the first time and we were just driving around the lake, Gus. I don't know if you remember that, but just like freaking out about everything. Like, oh my God, look at that rock
Rocks,
pile.
a
Oh my God,
boat.
look at that. Like there was a boat under the water.
We
We're
got
like, man, we've been fishing this spot for 10 years. We never knew there was a boat
yeah.
there.
We just
Just
had,
wild
I think,
stuff.
because prior to side image, we didn't even have GPS. We were just running 2D in a paper map on the Eagle River chain, and that's how we were figuring stuff out. And we would just mark down numbers because it came with hot spots or whatever. I don't know, like 10 per lake or 12 per lake, and before you know it, we'd have our own little hot spots, add in there. And I would put in. I got one here of a different lake just in front of me, but I'd put like in the category or like a key, like catch, hit, miss, follow. We'd be putting everything down. Everything was written down, and then now it's just press one button, mark, and then you can change the icon. You can change what it says. It's full GPS, but yeah, once you got the like GPS or some sort of mapping unit for Pelican Lake, or I guess any of the deeper clear lakes. Did some of that kind of come around? Did you ever get on an open water bite earlier on in Minnesota, or is that something that just kind of popped up later on in your musky fishing career?
So when I started catching open water, that started when I started guiding, and started to guide more because, as you guys know, here I am. I'm, working construction, and had a young family, and I come home and one day and tell my wife I think I'm going to be a muskie guide, and she's like, okay, okay. Right. So, and whatever. I think she knew I was pretty serious, but you don't just snap your fingers and start guiding people, 7 days a week. So, the first couple of years, you're kind of, I still had the tool belt on a lot, and I was, guiding when I could and that type of thing. As I was starting to get out on the water more and more, that's when I'm just like, all right, like I'm hitting these spots. It just was like my time management on the water and the time spent. I was just like really trying to do the math in my head, and especially early in the year, you're like, there's just only so many fish left over in the weeds, and we all know I've read about it, I've seen TV shows, and whatever, like heard a lot about it. I've just never had the time because keep in mind at the time there's mapping and 2D sonar, right? And the mapping was pretty good. You knew where you were on the lake and everything. Um, but yeah, I mean, I really just knew that there was more. To me, that was like the last frontier. I think somebody wrote a Muskie Hunter article even titled like Open Water, the Last Frontier. And that always stuck out in my head. And I'm like, I'm gonna figure that out. And it took me a couple, 2, 3 years maybe. And of course, just time on the water. The more time I spent out there, I'm like, all right, I have to allocate time into the open water basins. And each year I got better and better at it, but it was always something that it built, day to day. It kind of built. You'd find bait, you'd maybe find one fish, and the lakes I was fishing, usually deeper, clearer lakes, you would not get many follows. There was not many tattletales. So you'd get bites. That was really your concrete evidence. I mean, every once in a while you see a big hook down there or something on the 2D, but yeah, I mean, you really had to roll up your sleeves and just cast and work. And then also you got to tell the person that's paying you for the day, you got to, try to talk them into going out and chucking rubber, for, half the day or whatever out in the abyss. And at the time, that was kind of a tough concept to sell to people too, depending on what their idea or their background in muskie fishing was. Some of these guys, like if you're not casting at a shore or, a bank or something, they're real uncomfortable. And a lot of times even just having them a couple 100 yards off the shore casting at a weed edge, you get asked, you guys probably know, you get asked a lot, like, hey, can we fish shallower? It's like, well, actually, I was thinking about going out deeper, so it built and yeah, I mean, we had some really good years, open water bite and secondary spots. I felt really dialed in for a while out there.
And we're sitting around here laughing because our buddy Brian just joined us here on the podcast. Brian, what's going on? But you pretty much took the hammer, hit the nail directly on the head of what goes on in our boat with Brian a lot.
Like you were targeting
Coming
me there.
around. He's coming around.
I've come around a
Brian, you
little
a shallow guy?
Yeah, preferably or a drop off. The whole abyss stuff out in the basin. I just haven't had success doing it yet, so I don't have any confidence.
Well, yeah, I mean, nowadays you pretty much got to hit them right on the head, right? And yeah, those fish are just, they're being targeted so much more. It's a timing thing, obviously, and the electronics conversation too. I mean, obviously those fish they're seeing a lot more baits than they used to because man, back in the day when you timed it right and that bait dropped in front of one, you knew it because you you get one in the net and you're wondering where your pounder is and it's halfway down their throat.
Yeah, I mean, so you kind of talked about that a little bit. You touched on it a little bit, but like, kind of going back to the metro stuff because a lot of what I heard, when I moved to Minneapolis and started talking to people here about musky fishing was just them just talking about the pressure, like so much pressure here in the cities. So when you started guiding here in the Twin Cities, like what was the musky culture like back then? Like were there a lot of other people out there musky fishing or were they looking at you out in the middle of the lake, chucking rubber just going, what in the hell is this guy doing out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was some of that. I would say, in the so I really started fishing. We live right by White Bear Lake, right? So White Bear, Bald Eagle, Forest Lake on the east side of town. Those are the lakes I fish a lot. I get accused of fishing Tonka a lot. And I have fished Tonka a lot over the years, but I've always been on this side of town more and so you kind of get a feel for the regulars and stuff. And especially before I was guiding, I'd go out for a couple hours in the morning before work or, maybe, in the evening or whatever. So you get to know the regulars and the best way to describe it, I think, back in the day was like, and you probably hear me say back in the day too often tonight, but, there was, you'd have a guy that like, oh, it's the guy in the White Ranger. All he does is throw phantoms. And he fishes like those are his 4 spots over there. Then there's the guy that throws a cowgirl all year long, and then there's the guy like there wasn't a lot of people that adapted to the different bites throughout the year. The coot guy, for instance, the guy that used to make the coots. I don't know if you guys remember those baits. coot guy, Pat, he would just troll around the lake with coots. And then he'd be, he'd tell me, he's like, yeah, I haven't caught one all year. And then he's like, and then the weirdest thing happened. Like the second week in October, I caught 9, and it's like, well, yeah, like that was the pattern that day, or that
That's the
week.
coot bite.
Yeah, the coot bite. So, I think that, and it certainly wasn't just me, but I felt like the waters I was fishing, I was doing a good job of adapting to the different bites. I mean, I also too, I mean, my buddy Jim and I, who used to fish white bear a lot together, um, again, I'm not claiming to be the only guy that was fishing sand back in the day or anything, but tell you what, there was a number of days where we'd be out there and we're in his 16-foot Northwoods tiller or my 16-foot Lund tiller at the time. You fly a little bit more under the radar when you're in boats like that versus a 20-foot Ranger with a power pole. And other guys might have been fishing the sand at that time, but I'll tell you what, they sure as hell weren't doing it those days that we were out there because we would catch 6 fish in a morning, 8 fish in a morning, 9 fish in a morning. I mean, and nobody, everybody's kind of doing their own thing, doing their own routine. And, if you would get the right day, you get a nice cloudy day with a northwest wind. I mean, man, you could mop up. Nowadays, when they're in the sand, guess where all the fishermen are? They're all in the sand. If they're in open water, 90% of the fishermen are fishing in the open water. I mean, guys they've all adapted. And so I would say, yes, there was always quite a bit of pressure on the lakes, but the pressure wasn't always focused in the same areas like it is today.
Yeah. You can thank all those stupid podcasts and stuff like that for
Well, yeah, we joked. It's like, man, like, you write articles and film TV shows and all this stuff and go on podcasts now, and you're like, man, I guess maybe some people were listening,
Oh, good stuff. Brian, how you doing tonight? We didn't give you a formal introduction here to Ryan, so yeah,
I'm
what's going
doing
on?
great, doing great. Had a little late night work call I just got off of. But yeah, I'm eager to talk to you, Ryan, especially with us heading out there this weekend. That'll be pretty much my first time. I spent 4 hours on a Minnesota lake years ago, and terrible experience. So looking for a little payback.
Yeah, we didn't know what
Cool.
the hell we were doing. So
Well, thanks for joining, Brian. Nice to meet you. So where are you from, Brian?
I'm from like Appleton area, Green Bay.
Okay. So yeah, you're over that way. So cool. Well, hopefully that wind calm. I know it's gonna be blowing pretty good tomorrow. Hopefully it calms down for you guys. I know that. I mean, the water should be dropping right to a good wheelhouse. I would imagine. I haven't been out for a week and a half, so you guys should have like prime live bait water temps, I think. So
I'm not
hopefully they're
gonna get
snapping.
not gonna get too ahead of myself with the way my fall's been going, but it seems to be lining up pretty nicely for the first time this entire fall for me. Like all the bad weather's kind of blown through this week, and we got some nice like cold weather, but not, unbearable. And the wind actually looks very, very manageable, like sub 10 miles an hour all weekend. But yeah, Brian, not actually, I don't even know if anyone that's listening, we've ever told this before, but Brian actually grew up across the street from Gus and I. So we were kind of like, Gus and Brian are the same age. I'm much, much older than they are, but
Much,
Yeah.
much. Ancient.
ancient.
Nice. So awesome. That's great. We're all talking old fishing buddies, and it's cool. That's one of the coolest things about fishing, I think, is just the lifelong, friendships and everything. Not to get all sappy and everything on you guys on your podcast, but no, it really is. Even after guiding for a while, I've had, guys that I've guided now for, 13, 14 years, and it's, all of a sudden you realize like, you text and talk to those guys more than you talk to, some of the guys that are supposed to be your buddies. It really is a fun thing. And yeah, it's fun to get together and do those annual trips and stuff too.
So speaking of that, who, I'm sure it's going to be probably hard to just call out like individual names. So, do it if you can, but like, who are some of the guys that like, once you started getting, your early guiding stages, stuff like that, like Who did you start to get linked up with that maybe, started showing you the waters of like a Mille Lacs or going up to Vermilion, stuff like that? I mean, did you get into, I guess, did you kind of get in and do some of that stuff back in your early days?
So I was, when I was really like getting into musky fishing and, again, not to keep using the same cliche, but kind of bit by the musky bug. I was, you know, uh, early mid 20s guy with a kid at home and a wife. And really, I mean, we would do our trips to Pelican because, I would always go with my buddy Scott up there and I'd go to Bone with my other buddy. And we would kind of venture up to Mille Lacs a little bit here and there. We'd try, but I was never like a Mille Lacs guy or a Vermilion guy. As I fished a little bit more, I had buddies that definitely were, right? Um, but also like both of those lakes were kind of at the time sort of falling off, and or on a downward trend. As I was guiding, I just didn't have as much desire to be out there, and I don't think there was as much demand to be out there, and it was actually kind of a perfect storm for me because people were starting to, ask more questions about out west and stuff like that. So it was good for me. But no, I like, and then once I started guiding, it was tougher to fish with buddies, and because I made a commitment, I was going to make my living doing this, so I just felt like I really needed to make money. But I would say um I've definitely fished the most with Mike Kramer. Mike Kramer and I kind of came up, I would say, around, at the same time, through the industry. I'm using air quotes. Mike with his baits mostly, but also his guiding career. And then, myself, with my guiding career and promoting his baits, we just, we're fast friends and like-minded guys and had the same kind of sense of humor and that kind of thing. So he's been great. We're still dear friends to this day and talk, almost daily. And so that's and we got to work on getting on the boat more. We always, I mean, we would always get in the boat plenty, and we still do. We still do a woods trip and stuff together. But also I would say like of the older guys, there was a really good class of guides that were kind of like 10 years older than me type of deal, or not, or their careers were 10 years older. And there's a lot, too many to name, I guess. All of them are great guys, and I haven't met a guide that I don't like in Minnesota, honestly. But Brad Hoppy's always been really great, really hospitable. And Hammernick, I always feel like I gotta mention Hammernick because before I even met him, I'm like, this guy is the best. Like, this is the main, and all the stuff you'd hear and everything and all the stories, and he's kind of this gruff, cranky little bugger. And then, you get to meet him and he's just always cussing and he's always pissed and nothing's ever great, but he caught five today, but he's still pissed and this and that. But, and I remember just kind of thinking, man, he seems kind of, but I don't know. We started talking. I'd run into him in June. He'd be out fishing bald eagle a lot. And we'd chat and compare notes a little bit. And we ended up jumping in the boat once or twice together. And then I started going staying in he'd park a camper at Hoppy's place. And I'd go and stay in his camper a little bit. And he was just that whole attitude and everything. He was the nicest guy and by far the most helpful as far as really helping me with my guide career. Is whether it be giving trips or giving advice or, just whatever, just, helping with bites and everything. And he was always very, very, very helpful. And one of the funniest things, though, I was in it, just like a perfect story because he's never he was, it wasn't he's not real lovey-dovey or anything, right? But he's there's one time where I'd gone home and I was coming back up, and then he ended up getting canceled on or something. So he was running home. So we like literally passed ourselves. This is, at the Hoppy's place. He's got his camper parked on their property, and so I had a little bed back in the back where I would sleep, and he had his, master suite in the front, and we'd like, fix baits and watch movies and drink Coors Lights, just like a regular, whatever, 28-foot camper or whatever. And so I'm passing him, he calls it, whatever, and we're talking, and he's like, yeah, so do this and do that. And he's like, and you might want to check those mouse traps. And I'm like, what do you mean mouse traps? I mean, obviously it's a camper, right? But and I'm like, where are they? And he's like, and it had been like 100 degrees for the last week, right? It's super hot. He's like, yeah, I think one was starting to smell. And I'm like, well, where are they? And he's like, well, you know where you sleep? I'm like, yeah. He's like, okay. So like lift your pillow up and like basically there's a piece of plywood that you're sleeping on underneath the mattress. Lift that up and there's a little compartment there, and that's where they are. And I'm like, I'm starting to realize, I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, yeah, I hear that thing going off underneath my head when I'm sleeping, but I'm usually sedated by, a couple, 8, 9 Coors Lights. So I'm sleeping pretty good, but I'm still hearing, well, there's a couple of like caramelized mice in traps right underneath my head. And I'm thinking, all right, how many times did I sleep with these rotting mice? Like, right, but whatever. It was good times, good times. The early years. Now I have nice cabins to stay in with air conditioning and all kinds of stuff. So, but everybody's got their sleeping on the floor story or something. But yeah,
We certainly got a few of those. Yeah, he was always the guy. Like when I'd watch those old Keys episodes, like I always was like, man, I'd love to fish with that guy. Like he just, I don't know, the way he fished, the way he kind of carried himself on the show. I was always just like, he seems like a really cool dude. So, I don't
well,
know if he fishes much anymore or where he's at these days, but
well, he's down in Florida now, and he's become the best tarpon guide in Florida, basically, because that's just how he is. He's competitive, and he's really good at what he does. He's good at shooting pool. He's good at throwing darts. He's good at golfing. He figures out how to be the best at stuff, and that's what I liked about his attitude of fishing. Is it's kind of, I'm like, well, are you worried about showing that guy that spot? No, because if we're out on the lake together tomorrow, he's like, even if that guy fishes that spot, I'm gonna fish that spot and I'm gonna do it better. I'm gonna catch the fish. That was his attitude, and I don't know if that holds up as much anymore because it's a little bit more of a level playing field. But I mean, he would put his money where his mouth was, and he'd win tournaments. He'd beat you every day you're on the lake. I mean, he was determined. And he still is. He's just doing it with a different species nowadays. But yeah, I think that's and I think it also taught me too that catching muskies doesn't, just because you're Jason Hammernick or you're, whoever, you still have to work hard. You still have to be good. You still have to hone your craft. You have to, roll up the sleeves a little bit. It's not just, oh, I know that spot, so I'm gonna go catch them. You have to go and execute.
was there anything like, I guess it'd probably be hard to pinpoint, but like, obviously he was ultra competitive guy, but like, when you fish with them, is there anything specifically like different, when you get in the boat with them, did it just feel a little different? Like you start taking away, like learning information through doing that stuff, that it was anything that was just like, oh, I haven't thought about things that way, or was it just kind of like you said, it just was who he was, and, probably how
Yeah,
you are too around the cities.
he had a good, attention to detail as far as working baits and retrieves, and that's. I mean, I've only been in the boat with him a couple times, but I would always watch how he's working baits and speed changes and stuff like that. And that's true of any good fisherman. I mean, I fish with a lot of the guys, that are in the industry or whatever, guides or bait makers or whatever, and that is what separates guys, in my opinion, is their attention to detail. Mike Kramer is a really, really good example. A buddy of mine down here in the cities who fishes on Vermilion a lot, Dave Seeley. I mean, I started fishing with him a long time ago. Both those guys, their attention to detail with retrieves, with how fish set up on spots. Dave, I remember fishing with Dave. He doesn't say a whole lot in the boat, but a lot of times he'd be like, yeah, he'd always say they like to sit here. And it's like, and he knew like the cast, if you'd be coming up to a spot, he'd pretty much be able to call his cast. And he's a very like slow and methodical fisherman, much more, a lot of times I'd always want to hit him with some speed and stuff. And, so like you get one guy, you see he fishes a little bit slower, then you see another guy that fishes a little fast, and you just, I think like gleaning information from different people with different styles, really helps. And just, I think, years back, I mean, that's one thing I really noticed too is you had more opportunities, you had more at bats, you'd see more fish, you could screw more up and learn from them. And nowadays, a lot of times, you don't go out and move 20 of them anymore. You go out and you have maybe two or three good shots in a day, or maybe you have one shot, or um, you just really have to be polished and ready, I think, when those fish are presenting themselves, because it's if they're showing themselves, a lot of times it's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, no. So you talk about that. Like, is that, I think it probably goes to the overall. I mean, if we want to kind of go back to the metro musky fishing, I mean, because from my experience, like out on Tonka, now that I've started to fish it more, it's like every time I've gone out there, there's no lack of fish in the water from what it seems like. I mean, you're seeing them like they're there. They're just, somewhat difficult to get to eat. Um, what would you say the overall state is of muskie fishing here in the Twin Cities, right now?
I think it's pretty good. You know, the lakes are getting their fish, as far from a stocking standpoint. Quotas are being met. It's a healthy fishery. It's definitely a pressured fishery. I mean, you can tell when when a lot of times early in the season, I'll get those days where you still do move a bunch of them throughout the day, but basically like you don't have a shot at any of them, right? Then you can have the days where you don't see much, and then all of a sudden you have kamikaze fish coming in. The one thing I will say though is I would say the average size of fish is probably better. And that's one thing where I think in my brain, um, trying to remember stuff, and I used to keep pretty good records, and then stuff got crazy, and for the last 10, 12 years I just haven't logged my fish and kept records as good as I should. But we had some pretty big numbers of fish in the boat, on the year, years ago. But there's a lot of 3 footers, there's a lot of 38 inchers. Um, Nowadays, yeah, those fish are still out there, but I feel like there was more of them that size back in the day. And I guess just, and those lakes were what I would consider a mature fishery back then. But it just seems like there's more, fish over 42 inches, 44 inches. And maybe it's just that I've gotten better at just, contacting those fish and not contacting the smaller ones. But I would say it's a really good, I would say too, if you take away the whole, like, 4 million people or whatever, whatever we're rolling with here in the metro area nowadays, if you took away all those people and you just looked at the group of lakes that are here that have muskies, it's, one of the most densely populated areas of muskies in the state as far as lakes, in close proximity to each other. And they all offer chances at 50-inch fish. They all have 50-inch fish swimming in them. So it's not a bad area to be fishing. It really isn't. It's tough to get past the wake surfing boats and all that good stuff in the warmer months. And, beyond that, you know, Minnetonka's got some of the biggest fish in the state.
So I have a question, just in terms of advice for this weekend. Selfishly, I'm curious. I hopefully you guys didn't already hit on this, but I think it'll be good for anyone else going out this weekend. But what are some of your like top three confidence baits this time of year? I mean, what's your game plan getting out in the water? Where are you expecting the fish to kind of be locating?
I think I would be I mean, just with the way, my guiding program has been, I just really haven't casted a ton this time of year, the last 10 years. Um, I've been primarily dragging meat. So I mean, dragging live suckers is always going to give you a better opportunity at catching fish. But I remember when the bite was really, really good casting back in the day. And there I go with back in the day again. But I mean, I would say so, you know, big slow rubber is going to be good. One thing and this is the Dave Seeley who I mentioned just a little bit ago, when the first year that those double dogs came out, I remember Dave was like, he had his eye on these things. He's like, oh, like those double dogs are going to be great. Well, he was smoking fish on those things. And I don't think I would have tried this. He would just straight crank those things. And he got me going on it, and we had a couple like 3, 4 years where that was deadly, and especially in late November. So basically, cast the thing out to a weed edge, maybe kind of walk it off the weed edge just a hair, and then just painfully slow, just straight crank that thing in, and let that thing belly out, because those fish, I think that they're sitting on those deeper edges. And I do think throughout the day, they move up into the weeds, they move down because now it's nothing for them to use, if it bottoms off, it's like a secondary drop at 30 feet, after a turnover, they're using all of that water column, right? Like they can be sitting down on the bottom outside the break, or they can be positioned up in an ambush spot on those weed edges. So, whatever you're working, try to cover all those areas, right? So, um, you could even jig a Bondi or something like that too to get way down there. But once if you figure out where they're sitting too, and obviously now with electronics, with even just your side imaging, you're going to be able to see those fish if they're off the break a little bit. Because I really like big dive and rise baits too this time of year, but those aren't going to contact those fish if they're laying down off the break a little bit more. So, and then obviously you can adjust your sucker, your live bait too. So, um, yeah, I like the versatility of rubber. I still really like those double dogs. We still catch some nice fish on those. So, that'd probably be one of the first ones I'd toss this time of year.
Funny, real quick, Gus. I know you got something, but I just want to add. It's funny you mentioned that. I don't even mind saying this because they're hard to get. But are you familiar with those new Bam Bam baits? Um,
Is this like the top secret one? The
I
one
wouldn't,
that,
I wouldn't say they're a secret anymore. I mean, Brady, is it Brady Martz?
Brady Martz,
Yeah, he makes them out of Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania.
yeah, okay.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
I picked up a few of them at the Wisconsin show last year. He was at Wausau, and it that bait has outperformed any other rubber bait for me. And it's a double. I mean, it's like a slender double dog,
Hmm.
essentially with a really good head drop. But like, it's funny that you mentioned that just slow rolling double dogs and kind of working them down the break because like that rubber bait on Tonka for me has been dynamite as far as compared to any other rubber bait I've had. And I'm literally working it like when I work it in Wisconsin, like all other rubber, I'm wham bam, thank you, ma'am, like across the weeds. But in Minnesota, when I've started to use this bullfin, is like I'm just yo-yoing it down the break and really slow, like not any sort of huge, whatever, but just kind of yo-yoing it, letting it just come up and just kind of doing one of these and we're just working it down. And that rubber bait has crushed compared to any other Medusa, Bulldog, whatever. For me. So it's funny that you mentioned the double dog thing because I haven't seen too many people on Tonka throwing double dogs when I'm out
Well,
there.
you're like the eighth person now that's told me about those baits, and everybody's just been raving about them. So I'm gonna have to track one down, it sounds like.
Yeah, they're definitely cool. I mean, it's rubber baits are rubber baits, but they definitely have a very unique, action and kind of cool looking body. So shout out Brady if you're listening. I know you tune in from time to time, but yeah, I'm sure he'll be at some shows and whatnot next year. And he does like some, Facebook auctions and they go in like the first 6 minutes. So unless you're, an avid Facebook user, like good luck to you. But yeah, they're cool. They're cool. And in Uke Bay, and like you talk about, back in the day, like these pounders just disappearing. We haven't Gus, Brian, and I haven't really lived through any of those types of bites where like a new bait comes out and fish are just smashing. We haven't really
No.
gotten that we haven't gotten lucky. It's like, we're out there throwing pounders and a muskie's like, I've seen this, 5,000 times before. Like I'm good on that. So
Yeah, it really was funny too, like how it just seemed like, all right, like whatever Brad's coming out with for musky innovations, it's like, well, all right, I know what I'm gonna catch a bunch of fish. Like it yeah, I don't know. And rubber baits are always fun because you can fish them so much differently, and guys have different styles of fishing them, and and there's a lot of mods you can make to them. I mean, it just, not there's baits I've revisited or people have had to show me. There's baits that have sat in my boat for a while. Well, like the Phantom Exorcist. I remember I had a couple of those and they sat in my boat for a couple of years. And I'm like, I don't really get this bait. And then finally I just started throwing it. Like this was a couple of years ago, and we had like it wasn't like we went out and caught 100 fish on it, but it was like we caught like 10 fish in a year, and it was like I'm pretty sure like that those days like we weren't going to catch them on anything else, and it's just so fun when you have like your eyes are open to a new tool, right? You're like, all right, sweet. Like now I got confidence in this, and now file that away in the memory bank and remember the conditions. And yeah, so it's cool when you find a bait like that, and it's a little bit different and it's getting bit. Yeah, I got to get a hold of this guy. I got to get my hands on a couple of those baits because
yeah,
I
I
think
can't
you
imagine how
do.
many people are throwing
I
them
got
on white bear and over there.
It seems
I
like
don't know.
the leechers like them. I've definitely
Yeah,
messaged with a few people fishing other Minnesota waters, and they're getting some fish on both ends. So I
perfect.
think that's a for sure. Maybe because a new thing popped in my head. Maybe we'll retouch on the baits here shortly. But I wanted to circle back when you're talking about when Brian asked you a question on kind of like what would you like to throw or what are you going to be doing out there in the metro this time of year. One thing, or actually two things I was going to ask. So for boat control and boat speed, like what are you looking to do? Say you're running, it's you and a buddy. One guy's doing the sucker thing, and then the one guy's casting. What are you liking to do with the boat? Are you trying to stay in a specific depth? Are you weaving in and out? And are you going fast, slow? I know you're talking about working baits slow, but like, what kind of speed with the boat are you looking to do?
Yeah, so when I run suckers and I have somebody casting, my focus is always 100% on the sucker control or the boat control, but I put them on bobbers and I usually put them back a ways. So to me it's more like bobber control. Like I'm worried about where the bobber's going and how fast that's going versus where the boat's going, right? But obviously it's
Mhm.
it's one and the same. Um, but I would say I change up my thing. I mean, I will shorten that leash. I'll bring them in when somebody's casting, right? If I have a lot of times I have two suckers out on bobbers and one guy casting, right? I'll bring one in and keep that thing really close to the boat. There's also a lot of days where I have fish before you run over them with the boat, and if you're by, and it used to seem like it was always advantageous to have the baits way back, it seemed like. Nowadays, there's a lot of times where those fish are like associating the boat with bait, and they're swimming up to the prop of your motor, like looking for a sucker, and my sucker's 80 feet behind the boat. So I've like this year I always ran one pretty close to the boat. And I know a lot of guys do it that way all the time. Maybe I'm just late to the party, but um so I'll keep that sucker, pretty close if somebody's casting. Um, And I'll always just try to communicate, like, because I'm always running the boat from the back. Somebody's casting up front, and you guys may be doing a little bit different. You guys are all accomplished fishermen, and a lot of guys, you guys might have the foot pedal in the front, right? This is the only time I have my foot pedal still, but this is the only time of the year I'll use the hand remote, right? And that's so I can, run freely around the boat, or if we get a bite, I can spin the boat around and run up to the front deck and control the boat with the remote. Um, but I will always be communicating with the guy because I'm usually going to be right on the weed edge, right? So a lot of times, like casting more off the bow out in front of the boat versus up into the slop. Sometimes, like this year, especially with the warmer water, I think it's been good to throw even. I mean, we were throwing top water half the time up over the weed flats and trying to drag fish out that were way up there. But as far as speed goes with the suckers, zero point 0.6 to zero point 0.8 miles an hour is pretty ideal for me. When it starts to blow pretty good, I mean, it's one of those deals, I always like to work into the wind if I can. And it's tough because it feels like you're either going too fast or you're going the wrong way. But again, with the remote, you can control that speed so much better. Um, and I'm too dumb to just lock in a miles per hour. I'm always just doing it with my thumb because sometimes you'll even see a gust of wind coming across the lake and you'll go, you'll juice up the speed a couple clicks before it even gets there because you're gonna before that the brain and the trolling motor can accommodate for the wind gust back in your face. You're already now the bow swung and now it's trying to get back up to zero point 0.7 miles an hour and it's lagging. I like to be proactive and just I'm laser focused. We're always telling stories and goofing around in sucker season, and I've even had people at the end of the day, they're like, "Oh, I didn't know you were running the boat," because I mean, I got my remote in my pocket and I'm like all huddled and whatever, and sunglasses on. They can't tell. I'm not looking at them. I'm looking at my screen and I'm like hitting the button, about 6 times per second. But no, I mean, obviously, boat control is paramount with suckers. You got to have them. My way of thinking is you got to have them close to the cover, but obviously not in the weeds. Like Greg Thomas, probably the best live bait fisherman I know. When I fish out west, talk to Greg constantly. We're usually on the same lake or one lake over from each other, and if you're fishing the same area as Greg, you're going to hear from him about 27 times a day. Um, he'll ask you what the water temperature is all 27 times he contacts you too. And he knows the answer, right? And he knows it hasn't changed or what. Yeah, but he he'll run a little deeper and off the edge a little bit. And I always like to run, and anytime I catch one and he's like, "Are you shallow? You must be shallow. Are you shallow?" And then anytime he catches them and I'm not, I'm like, "Are you up deeper? You're deeper, right?" So it's just kind of different styles, but I don't know. I think they ought to be by the weeds and ambushing and whatever. So I don't know. That's my train of thought on that, I guess.
All right. Well, you opened up the door to Grieg, old Grieg.
Old Greg.
We've got to know him pretty well through the trail last couple years. And I gotta ask. He's been on here a few times, and he's definitely told his own. He might even be making an appearance on here in the near future. Hint, hint. But what do you got for us for a Greg Thomas story? Any in the back pocket that come to mind? I'm sure there's a few. I probably should have hit you up prior because I figured his name was gonna get brought up, and I could see you're kind of
Yeah,
racking your brain. We can
I
come
feel
back
like
to
I
it
gotta
too.
like screen. I gotta screen the Greg stories in my brain before I just start. Yeah.
Let me ask you this. You can think on it. We'll come back to it because I don't want to not ask this because it's something I want to make sure I bring up while I'm also remember I'm throwing a lot at you, so I apologize. All right. So with a little bit of a thought experiment here with the live bait stuff, because when I was out with some buddies on Tonka, the first time I ever live bait fished, this was just a few weeks ago, we had two, one fish that came in super hot on the Bam Bam for me. And it was a textbook, like came in super hot, followed around, one turn, peeled off the bait, and just T-boned the sucker like right away. Took it out to deep water, screaming line. We chased her down, all that stuff. It was about a 43, 44 incher like nice fish. And right as we're about to set the hook, here comes the bobber back up to the surface. And then, fast forward hour later, same deal. Not real nice fish comes in, probably about a 46, 47. We're getting all excited. Turns, comes around in one turn with the bowfin. Same shit comes out, peels, takes the sucker. Deep water. It actually, we had live scope running, and that fish, I think, actually took it to the bottom of the lake, which is something I've never really done, is like follow a fish after it ate the sucker on live. Like normally all hell kind of breaks loose, but our buddy was actually following it and it went down to the bottom of it was like, probably 30-foot edge. Took it to the bottom. We turned the boat around and same thing. Bobber came back up. So I'm not sure if you see that at all in the cities with them being a little bit more pressured sucker fishing wise. And if you had any tips on, obviously you can't prevent that. The only thing you could do is set the hook earlier. So I guess the question, long-winded question here is, time between eat and set. Do you try to keep it in a certain window, or is it like if you watch it eat it a certain way, like are you setting it pretty quick, or do you have kind of run the same process every time, fish eats?
So, so that super good question. And this is so live bait fishing to me is one of the things that I feel like when you're sitting around with the fellas or whatever and you know having a pop or something at the end of the day, I feel like it's like maybe like one of the more like the most like analytical parts of musky fishing because I mean you have the days where everything goes right and like you're just like man they were chewing today and like you set the hook 5 times and you get all 5 fish and they're all hooked right in the corner of the mouth. And then you can have another day where you get 5 bites and you get one of them or none of them, or, and there is a lot. There's a lot to analyze and digest and no pun intended, but you know, when they're biting good, they're biting good, and you're going to have a really high batting average. When the bite is not good, which this can be super frustrating, right? Because you're straining to get a bite, you finally get one, and then you swing and miss, or whatever. Or the thing will swim around and spit the sucker back at you, or it'll drop it. So just if I'm just going with the information that you just gave me, so you said, um, so okay, you said a couple things. The way that it bit, so I actually, oddly enough, I with all the live bait fishing I get, I rarely get it where like one comes in hot on a bait and then like turns its head, looks at the sucker, and goes and eats it right away. Usually it'll come in on a bait and it'll be like a 5 to 10 to 45 minute process to get him to actually grab the sucker. So there's usually a little bit of there's like a courting period, if you will, between the muskie and the sucker. Um, so so now that just leads me to my next thing. You said the fish ran quick, it grabbed it quick, and then it ran quick. So I would say a lot of times runners have a lower percentage of hookups, right? But and I think sometimes so I've seen them run when other fish are there and they're nervous. I've seen them run when they smack it real quick, and I think that they feel hooks or they even like kind of like skin hook themselves a little bit just on impact. Um,
Hmm.
or they don't have it right. They have it by the tail, and they don't like the situation, or you get right over them, and they can feel the trolling motor. Part that's not really making sense is you said that it swam down into 30 feet of water and was like down on the bottom. Typically, that's what I want. Like if one like eats it on a break and like swims down to wherever that the bottom of the like once you kind of bottom out to the bottom of the break, whether it's darker water, it might be 15 feet, clear water it might be 25, 30. once they're down there, a lot of times you can feel them kind of crunching on it, like they're like repositioning. As soon as we get position on that fish, like we're gonna hit it right away. Because stuff's usually happening pretty quick. I don't want to give it any extra time because it might start eating, like literally eating the sucker, turning it, digesting it. It's weird that, yeah, to me, it's weird that those things grabbed it, ran so quick, but also ran down. Because a lot of times when they're running fast, in my experience, they're not usually like going down. Sometimes I also think too, if I move up on top of a flat and we get the bite like on top of the flat, I think sometimes they're confused and lost and they don't actually know where the break is. So they're just like running and they're probably trying to get to a break, but they don't know which way is up or down. If you're
Fish.
on Sunken Island or something like that, that's, a couple football fields big or whatever. So yes, a lot of variables there, but that is weird that that happened twice and the bobber popped up. I would venture a guess that maybe just like the fish was so wound up on the bait and like they were overstimulated and they just like ate quick and something just wasn't right. Like they kind of hooked themselves or they didn't like the situation. It's funny though that they dove deep and then spit the thing out. So I don't know.
Yeah,
Other than
That
that,
is
can't
weird.
help you.
The only times I've experienced muskies spitting suckers are like within, I would even say, I was gonna say 10 seconds, but I would say within 5 seconds of pickup. They grab it, move quickly, and then it's off. Like they spit it
Yeah.
or something. Like they hit it too. I don't know what,
it's the first
goes
time I've
on.
ever seen that happen.
But
First time
when
I've
Max
ever.
described it, I'm like, no, once they swim down, it's like you can apply, you can almost apply enough pressure to bring them back up to the surface and they won't let go, is
Right.
what I've experienced, you know.
Yeah, you could just put the trolling motor on 9 and just drag them over to the boat landing if you wanted to.
But I know that they freak out. I 100% know, and I know Brian, you maybe experienced that when you were with Charlie, but there's actually
Yeah.
another time which Brian Max, I probably have told you. I know for sure I've actually never told it on the podcast here. Funny enough, it was probably the first guide trip I ever did. Um, I took a friend's dad out in early November, and the high that day was maybe 32, 33. It snowed pretty much all day, and he was a go, and I was a go. And I'm like, all right, we're gonna sucker fish, we're gonna cast, and one of the sucker fish that we got, we actually never had to set the hook. It ate. I think it was the bobber sucker because I remember it bouncing and moving around and then it just shot line. It ate in like a deeper section, and then all of a sudden, like I could just see all this commotion. I'm like, what the hell's going on the surface now? Like, and I just like used the trolling motor, got a little bit closer. I could see the bobber. I could see all this commotion. This muskie grabbed the sucker, and before we could reposition to set the hook, it wrapped itself like 20, 25 times in the line. And it was like a 36 incher, and we just put the bag under it, and we're like, all right, that's it.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, man. And that
I got
day,
I
the
got a
other
good one.
fish we got, we just it ate the sucker, and the guy was applying pressure, about to set the hook, and I'm like, whoa, whoa, wait a second, because like I just about saw the fish. It was up so high, and I'm like, don't move. And I just put the bag underneath it. So we caught two fish that day, and we never had to set the hook.
Did you tell the client like, hey, yeah, this is musky fishing. This is what happens every time.
Yeah, oh yeah, every time.
Well, dude, I had one happen one time. Two guys in the boat, like good dear buddies, right? Like in like very like easy going with each other, like very chill situation. And yeah, so this is actually hilarious because it ended up being this 46-inch fish that was like a repeat offender sucker muncher, right? Like between my boat, Kramer's buddy's boat, like I mean, this thing had been caught like 9 times in like the last couple of years, right? Because it had like snuffy, like the upper palate, like the snuffy nose thing. So anyway, Matt, was it Matt? I think Matt caught, and it was the same thing. Like the bobber went down, the bobber like didn't like whatever. It didn't really, it was like just sitting there, and I'm like kind of pulling up on the thing a little bit. And I'm like, like the thing was like lassoed in the line. It just rolled in the line. And I'm like, dude, I don't think you should set on this one because we might break the line. So he just like gingerly like gets it in the net, and we net the thing, and we're like, oh, hey, it's Snuffy, whatever. And we let it go. We're kind of laughing or whatever. And then I don't know, fast forward to the next bobber down. All of a sudden, Matt and Mike are arguing with each other, and I'm like, what's going on? Because it's like they were arguing over whose turn it was then, because they're going every other fish. And I'm like, guys, I can't help you, but somebody's got to figure it out, or I'm going to be setting the hook pretty quick here. Like, you got to do rock, paper, scissors or something. But because, yeah, I mean, and that was a valid argument. He's like, I didn't get to set on the last one. I didn't really, like, it didn't, never bent the rod. And Mike's like, well, dude, you just put hands on a muskie, caught one. So,
So whose side are you? Whose side are you on?
what's that?
Whose side are you on?
That's the thing. I wasn't picking sides there. And I can't remember who eventually prevailed there, but basically whoever did probably looked like the bigger dick in that point. At that point.
Right.
Yeah, it is. Those conversations are funny. I mean, I told this on a few pods ago, but Brian and I literally had the same thing happen on one of our Sundays. I don't know, Brian, if you want to tell it real quick to Ryan, but yeah, it was same exact, not exact
Yeah,
situation.
it was yeah, similar. Neither of us had caught a sucker fish in a long time, and Max is like, "Oh, I've had horrible luck this fall. Like, let me shake the rust here." And I was like, "I haven't caught one in years on a sucker." So we're like having a
I'm holding the rod.
We didn't predetermine who was going to get the fish. So the sucker
Yeah.
rod goes off. We're like, well, who gets it? And we're like, well, shit, we didn't talk about this. We didn't think we were going to get a bite today.
Gus is like, "Come on, come on."
Yeah, like the windiest spot in the lake. It's blowing
We-
like crazy.
We
and-
literally did rock, paper, scissors, and then like I can't remember who won. We're like, all right, best of three. I guess they're like, and still missed it, but oh well.
Yeah, of course. Well, I've had guys where they're like, okay, I'm gonna take from 8 in the morning to 9 in the morning, and then you get from 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock. Well, guess what happens? Every hour, not I wish every hour, but every time you get a fish playing, like starts playing with a sucker, it's like 8:53, and then the thing bites at like 9:02, and it's like, well, and finally they're just like, fine, like a hard stop. So like, they're literally like, everybody's like hanging over the side of the boat, like as one's playing with a fish, like waiting for it to bite, or waiting for you, hoping it stalls out, but.
Yeah, we stopped doing the time slots back in the day. That's how we used to run it when Gus, Brian, and I would fish together. And that was like really before we even understood like windows and how the bite windows get so tight in the fall where you can kind of double, triple up in a short amount of time. And so we learned our lesson the hard way on that one. We're like, you know what, maybe we should just go every other so one guy isn't catching 2-3 fish in a day, and everyone else
It's
is
not
not
an
getting a
ideal
bite.
program.
No.
It's really not. I think it's like maybe guys that like to bet or something, gambling junkies or something. But no, it's funny too.
Could be us.
So of all the sucker fish that we've caught in my boat, I mean, I've set the hook on very few sucker fish in my lifetime, right? Like we're talking like maybe like 15 or something like that, right?
Wow.
And I filmed a sucker show with Jim Sarek, a muskie hunter one a few years back. I mean, it's almost, it was probably 8 years ago or something now. And we had a thing going, and we kind of had some fish pinned in an area, and I knew it was going to happen or whatever, and we get in there and we didn't drag a sucker 100 yards, and all of a sudden one like shark weeks the sucker on the surface, and every time they would do that year, it was always a good one. And so this happens, and I can see the thing, it's kind of up high in the water, and I'm backtracking with the boat, and I'm like, yes, and you're always like a little bit more jacked up when you're filming and stuff, obviously, and we get over the top of the thing, and I'm like, well, who's up? And he's like, well, you're up. And I'm like, oh dear God, and like all of a sudden my heart's pounding out of my chest, like you wouldn't believe. Like, I mean, it was like an intense, like a buck fever deal, and set the hook and cracked it pretty good as a 52 incher. And I'm like,
Oh,
okay, I got it. I'm back. I get, I know what I'm doing now. And then the next one was probably like 5 years later. And an old buddy who I ended up was, yeah, our daughters were on the same hockey team, so we're coaching together. And so we jump out in the boat for just like a couple hours. It was like this time of year, and we didn't really talk about it. Again, bobber down, and we're out on White Bear Lake, and I haven't set the hook since we filmed that show. And I'm like, I get over the top of it, and I go to hand him the rod, and he's like on the opposite side of the boat. And I'm like, Jess, I'm like, dude, come on, get over it. It's time to set the hook. He's like, no, dude, not doing it. And we basically had like a fight in the boat about who was going to set the hook. And this is the most stubborn guy I know. And he's like, nope, dude, you're taking it. You're taking it. Sure as shit, I set the hook, and it's like a gorgeous 50 incher again. And I'm like, dude, why didn't you take it?
It's
That was the
hard.
point of this going out. You were supposed to catch the fish, but
It's hard,
whatever.
man. It's
Yeah,
hard.
it always feels good to crack one though.
Yeah, but it feels 10 times worse when you whiff because it's all, it's right there, like sucker fishing is like we've talked about this now a couple different times, but like it's it's a tough game because like you wait all day, you finally get the bite. It's not like, casting when you get that one opportunity, like whether it's in the eight and you screw it up or something. Cause like a lot of times I feel like with that, yeah, you can absolutely do things, in a figure eight to make a fish eat and all that good stuff. But like if a fish is fired up and it smokes a bucktail both side, like, and you give it some weight and set the hook, like it's gonna get hooks. You're gonna have a chance to catch that fish. But with sucker fishing, you wait all day, you get the bite, and then it's like 30 seconds of just agonizing anticipation of like, should I set it? Should I not? Should I do this? Whatever, like what's down there? I got no clue how big this fish is. And you never see it. You never know, like if you whiff on it, it's like, it just racks your brain like for a long time. Cause you're just like, man, it, could have been a 50, 51 or, big, gorgeous 4 footer or something like that. You have no clue, whereas if you lose a fish, I'll cast it during the day and it's like you see it, it comes in, maybe it's a 37. Like you get over that pretty quickly. But those sucker fish that you miss, it's like it was right there. It ate my live bait. There was 6 hooks, in that fish. Like, how did it not get a hook in its mouth?
Oh,
Like it's
absolutely.
hard to imagine.
Right. Well, and as a guide, I put way more pressure on myself, or like I take more of the onus. Like if we miss one, I'm like, we should have hit it earlier. We should have hit it later. Like I just you're always thinking about what I could have done. And yeah, I mean, 9 times out of 10, it's just however that thing had the thing in its mouth, and you couldn't have really done anything different. But
Yeah. I guess yeah. So I guess I was trying to make this point and I wasn't doing a very good job. I think yeah. So like when you're casting, and you screw up an eight or something like that. Like you can be like, oh, I screwed up the eight. I should have done this or should have done that. And you can tell right away, like, oh, I was way too fast in this corner and I set too early or I set too late. Whereas sucker fishing, it's different because you're like, I thought I did everything right or whatever. Maybe you screwed up something, but it's like you just never know because that fish ate the sucker. There's two trebles, and whether you run a clip or you run a single hook, you're talking about 7 potential points that this fish can get hooked on. And then when you set the hook and the freaking rig comes flying out of the water, you're like, what? Like, how in the hell did
no,
that just happen?
right. And it's maybe it feels counterintuitive to some folks, but I mean, obviously, like when you have that clean miss where you just nothing but the rig just comes sailing back, it feels the worst, it looks the worst, it feels but really those are the best hook sets, right? Because that's what you're trying to accomplish is ripping the harness out of the sucker. It's the ones where guys are like, "Oh, I got him," and then they swim around the boat a little bit, and then as soon as you go to slide the net under them, they just let go of the sucker and swim
Mm.
away. And the rig, the nose clip, everything's still in the sucker, and you're like, dude, like you want all of that to come out, like you got to give yourself a chance to hook them. But
Right. Yeah, I know it's definitely a mind game, and I'm all for what, Gus? All for two on sucker eats this year,
I think
and
so, that I remember.
both of them were just clean rips right out of the meat. And that's where I'm
Yep.
just sitting there like, what? Like not just a piece. Like I would have just loved to feel them for like a couple seconds. Like that would have been great. Taking that.
Right.
I just got in the habit of telling people when that happens, and I think that it is in a lot of cases, if you don't get a look at them, I think a lot of times those clean misses are smaller fish. And if you just tell yourself that, you'll sleep better at night.
God, that makes me feel
I'm
so much better.
I agree there, honestly. And another point for that is that I would, it sucks to say this, but I'd much rather have that happen than wait too long and gut hook a fish. That's
Right.
that's the worst thing you can do. You never want to. I mean, it's tough when you first start out sucker fishing, like knowing the timing, but as you know, and now I know doing it quite a bit, you can feel, you can tell when they're actually really chewing on it, and you have to set the hook instantly when you feel that, when you feel them not moving, but you can feel the rod tip bouncing up and down, that they're rearranging that sucker in their mouth, that they're potentially could be putting it down their gullet by then. So that's when you give her hell for sure.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and yeah, to kind of circle back on that whole idea, I guess, absolutely agree with you, Gus. I mean, basically, once I get positioned with them with the boat, and I like the positioning, which is, either if they're way down there, right over the top of them, or if they're kind of quartering away. I prefer not to hit them on a run, but if they're running hard and I catch up to them, they run. If I catch up to them a second time and they run, we're just going to get within striking distance then and hit them again. The only time I will ever give a fish more time is if I can clearly see the fish and the sucker. And I like in a lot of the lakes that I fish, all the lakes that I fish basically with live bait are pretty crystal clear, especially in the fall. So if they're up higher in the water and they're swimming around with it like a freaking dog bone in their mouth and whatever, like you can a lot of times you can tell when it's time to set the hook. If they got the thing just beaked and you can tell that you're just going to rip the harness out, I might give them a minute or two, but I'm not waiting. I'm not gonna like eat a sandwich. And I'm not even like looking at the time either. I'm just kind of like, I might just sit there for a second and then I might look again. In most cases, when you do that, it usually ends up going the wrong way. Usually they end up either spitting it or like very rarely do they end up like choking up on the thing when you're right over the top of them. So, but I have had it happen and it has worked out to my advantage. And it's just what you're saying. As soon as you can feel them starting to crunch in that rod tape, then okay, now it's time. We'll get in position and we'll smack them right away. But
Hmm.
Hmm.
And not
And
that,
on the Go
oh,
ahead,
I was
Gus.
just gonna say quickly, and not that I'm giving people incentive to wait longer, and I know you're not at all either, but and I don't want to get into any like horror stories or anything, but anytime I have had one hooked deeper, it's typically prior to October 15th ish, which is pre-turnover basically. Warmer water, they're turning that sucker around faster, they're eating it faster. Those are the times when I've seen, close calls, them turning a sucker head first way too fast, and typically running smaller suckers, those always got to hit earlier. Later in the fall, they tend to just kind of T-bone them around, or if you're using like a 14 to 18-inch sucker as opposed to like a 10 to 12, it might take them a second, especially if it is like a moderate sized muskie trying to take a 16-inch sucker down. It's going to struggle, but it wants it really bad. So,
yeah, Yeah. No, I've seen, I mean, yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I've seen a couple, like normally, like we were talking about runners, like, I mean, every once in a while you just see something that you haven't seen before. And I'm just thinking of one, normally when they're running, like I said, I have a lower batting average as far as hookups go, right? And typically they don't seem to have those suckers as good. But we had one it was running, it was running, it was running, and it was running up shallow too, which is even, yeah, again, like usually a bad sign. And this one was on a break and it just chose to run shallow. And finally, I'm like, we just got to hit this thing. And this was the only time I've ever like I couldn't like we get the thing in the net and I'm like laughing. It was a nice fish. It was like a 49.5 inch humpback on white bear, and it's in the net, and I'm like laughing. I didn't think there was any urgency because I just thought the sucker was out of the equation because I didn't see any sucker. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I'm like the rig is, like choked up pretty good on the fluoro, and I grab the thing and I take a pliers and I kind of spread its mouth open. And I was basically watching the sucker go down the thing's gullet like quicksand.
Oof.
Oh,
And I immediately grabbed the cutters and I just started cutting the rig apart. And I got all but the sucker and the front treble, and I guess therefore the nose clip all went down the hatch. The thing
Wow.
swam away.
Holy shit.
I don't know how it did after that, but I could not believe it. I was shocked. And so I actually, that thing is a 49.5 inch humpback. So if you were to stretch that thing out, or if I mean, it probably was a longer. It clearly was an old fish. It had a giant melon on it, huge, huge head. And my theory on that, and from my recollection, it was kind of a regular size sucker. Maybe like a 15 incher or something. I think that thing basically it went up and just grabbed the thing head first, and it never had to turn it, I assume. It probably was
mhm.
just already like, you know, going down the hatch, and then as it was swimming, it just, probably was going in there because I couldn't believe how fast that thing was running and how it had any time to choke that thing down like that. It just didn't compute with me, but
I mean,
anyways, I hope she's still swimming.
yeah. I mean, well, you do it long enough, you're gonna have situations like that. So you got to be prepared for it. Have the proper tools if that situation happens. But like, in northern Wisconsin, when we've been running these boat side suckers, a lot of the times like they're within visibility of where we're fishing, and like this year and in years past too, but this year specifically just a couple weeks ago, Gus and I were on the back of the boat. We actually had two sucker eats and we got to watch the fish eat the suckers. And I mean, you see how fast and violent they strike baits. I mean, it's not all too different. Like it was probably one of the cooler things to watch happen, like right at our feet, like we're literally just there. I damn near could have reached out and grabbed the fish. It was that close. But the sucker swam down, it swims up trying to swim away from the fish. The fish turns and just like boom, I mean, hits it like it would hit a bucktail. So I could definitely, envision that if the sucker even just turned a little bit or something like that, and the fish just accidentally headhunted it or whatever. But
Mhm.
both of these were like the most textbook clean, like just T-bone right on the side. It was really cool to see. One thing I did want to ask, so like you mentioned most of the lakes you are fishing in are these crystal clear lakes. So like sucker depth wise, I mean, are you just kind of putting them down like just past visibility? Are you running them? Does it really matter? Have you noticed a difference on depth really, or if they want to find them, they'll find them kind of ordeal?
So, yeah, I almost always fish them under a bobber. I use like a fill slip bobber. Um, and I basically, knowing the spots that I'm fishing, typically I just eyeball them depending on the spot, and just in pretty much every time I set them out on a new spot, I'm adjusting them a little bit. Um, if I'm on, say I'm out in 18 foot of water and, I got weeds, you got a kind of a tapering weed edge and you have deep weeds, sticking up, 5, 6 feet off the bottom, I'll basically, try to get them just over those weeds. So I'll try, maybe 10 feet down or something like that, 10 feet to the rig or something like that. And then a lot of times I like to get up, on some of the flats. When I'm out west, there's like these bigger, expansive flats that have a lot of like tall standing cabbage in 10 to 14 feet of water that you can actually like snake them through, so then I'll shorten the leash up, and maybe if I'm in 12 feet of water, I'll maybe have like 6, 7 feet, to the rig or something underneath the bobber.
I love how we're just
But
asking you a bunch of questions that are going to be helpful for us for this weekend.
well, yeah, hopefully they are. I don't know. Yeah, I mean they work about 33% of the time. So
We'll take that. We'll take that. All right. Well, I'll circle back on this because we're gonna probably have Greg on here soon, and I'm gonna ask him if he's got any Ryan stories. So now's your
yeah.
time to get back at him before or a little preemptive.
Well, I don't. I mean, is this like a family podcast or not? I don't.
Nah, let her loose.
No, we swear, and no.
But you don't have to let it like too loose, something that Greg doesn't want on here.
Let him loose, but
Well,
not
right,
too loose.
I mean, I guess I don't have any nothing's coming to mind of like any like real crazy.
What's the first time you
I
jumped? Have you fished with Greg before in the same boat?
Greg and I have never fished in the same boat together. No,
That's crazy.
no, yeah. I mean, it's kind of sad how little time. I mean, I'm never. I mean, we're mostly out west together, right? And I'm never out there with a free day, really. It's
Right.
kind of tough. Every once in a while, he has a free day, but he's usually. I feel like sucker season too. There's always like if you got a day off, there's always you can go clean the sucker tank, or you got to go get bait, or you got to fix something because something's always breaking when it's cold. I mean, and especially if you're Greg, something's broken. Something's always broken for Greg.
hmm
No, he's just a character, man. He's a lot of fun. Well, this year, um, he, he, he had me over. He's such a Kentucky fan. Kentucky was playing somebody in football. I'm not a big college football guy. And he's like, "Oh, you got to come over." His buddy Jeff Whitmore, who's always fishing up in DL as well. Jeff's got like the doppelganger boat to my everybody else. I was like, "Oh, you're out on DL." I'm like, "No, I'm not, but I think I know who it is." Right? This Jeff, and so Greg had me and Jeff over for steaks, and oh yeah, Kentucky's on, whatever. And I had like just gotten up there, and what it's a very really nice offer, and everything. I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll eat a real meal for one night while I'm up here. When I get over there, and I bring a little tote bag of beers, and I think Greg might have had a gummy or something. He wasn't quite he wasn't super social, but and he's like got this apart. He normally is at Punjab's the budget host motel in DL. He moved on up. He's like renting by the month. He's got this real swanky apartment situation right on Little DL. And I think if anybody else would have been in that wing of apartments, they would have called the cops for a noise complaint because I didn't know TVs went up that loud. He hardly talked to me and Jeff. Jeff and I had a nice little evening, had steaks and chit-chatted about fishing and got caught up. And Greg had this Kentucky football game on as loud as the TV would have it go. And he was in the zone. So I think there was oh yeah, no, he had one of those drinks, one of the THC drinks. So he was in the zone. So if he ever asked you to go watch a Kentucky sporting event, just know it's probably not going to be a social. It's going to be him yelling at the TV and not socializing a whole lot. So
Yeah,
just
nothing
an
better
FYI.
taking a gummy and watching your favorite sports team. Just getting dialed in.
Right. Yeah, my wife loves that.
Speaking of which, I'm assuming you're a big Wild fan.
Yeah, yep, yep. Um, yeah, I mean, I've always been a Wild fan, but yeah, the last couple of years, not this year, but 2 years, yeah, 2 seasons before, I've got to take a couple of the guys out fishing, which has been awesome.
Oh,
Oh,
Um,
nice.
Oh,
nice.
that's sweet.
yeah, not this season, but last season I had Marc-Andre Fleury and Marcus Foligno out in the boat, and the year
Sweet.
before I had Ryan Hartman and Ryan Carter. Carter's he's against him a little bit back. He's a couple years younger than me, but we got kind of some mutual buddies and stuff. He's an awesome dude, and he kind of yeah, he got Hartman out there, and then I think they kind of spread the good word or whatever, and then Foligno got a hold of me last year, and of course every time those guys come out, they want to go like when they get back in town for camp, right before camp starts, but so like early September, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm like, that's the best time of the year to be fishing, and whatever. And so make it happen. And then they always get a day where it's like dead calm and like 95 degrees and sunny and
Yeah.
so yeah, we moved a few fish. Felino had a nice one up a couple times on a top water and middle of the day and dead calm. So it was kind of cool. We got a good look at it and stuff. But yeah,
I've
still
heard
got to get
Flurry
home
is
to set the hook.
I've heard Flurry has quite the sense of humor. I don't know if that
Yeah,
came through at all during your guide trip
he
with
was
him.
awesome. I was trying to get him on the, like the poking the butt end of the rod deal.
Yeah.
And I don't know if he really knew what I was, I think if he knew it was a prank, he would have, but yeah, there was,
Like, what the hell is this guy doing?
yeah. And then I'm like, I don't know, like Foligno is so intense. I'm like, I don't know if I want him to like, because he's throwing a Cannonball Junior, and I'm like, if he like does a false hook set, like that thing might go through somebody's skull. And I don't want one of these guys going on the injured reserve before the season even starts. So maybe maybe we'll pump the brakes on that.
On the IR with an upper body due to musky fishing.
Right, right. Yeah, Cannonball
Yeah,
Junior to the skull.
their agents are telling them like, yeah, in the off season, go fishing, something, leisure. Then they pick musky
Right, right.
fishing.
Yeah, they try to hold the fish and they get a tooth through their thumb and they got 8, 9 stitches going through there.
Well, dude, I was sort of like that was in the back of my mind a little bit. I mean, Felino, I mean, he's a big dude, man, and he's like he just like you see him in the games. I mean, he's the nicest. I mean, we had talked on the phone a little bit, and he came down the dock and he's like, "Hey, Rye," like we were old buddies, and just jumps right in the boat and just starts fishing. Dude fished hard and just great guy, super super great guy. But he like he had the right intensity for musky fishing, and I think Flurry was maybe probably would have been more content like watching a bobber and socializing a little bit. Like Felino was like laser focused and he actually I saw on Instagram he got one and I met he because he has a place oh why can't I think of the lake oh shoot it's not it's just north of like Georgian Bay a little bit, so he's been out
Oh
before,
shit.
the guide on Georgian Bay, and him and his brother, and I know he really wanted to catch muskie and he finally got here clearly up in Canada from the pictures, but yeah, so good for him. Good for him. But yeah, it'd be cool to get him back out and get him a big one. So
Nice. Well,
Sweet.
cool. Well, you guys got anything else for Ryan here? I mean, he's been very generous this time where shit, I just looked and it's like 10 p.m. So a lot of fun.
Not without crawling down many rabbit holes. I was trying to
Yeah.
think of like a quick hitter question.
I got a yes or no for you, real quick, short and sweet. Is it worth our time to night fish this weekend?
I mean, we're not going to do it anyway. So
Why not?
I'm just trying to think of the last time I've night fished in November. I mean, I will never say no to night fishing. I mean, as far as its effectiveness, I say no to it all the time personally because I'm old and lazy. But um, no, I know you said yes or no, but I would say, especially if you feel like you've got some dial tone, if you got some addresses out there, Absolutely, man. I mean, pull a little overtime. I don't think I'd stay out there till midnight, but you know, if you got a moon doing something, a little bit after sunset or whatever, yeah, I mean, by all means, if you can fish confidently after dark, it's never a bad idea. And I think it just becomes harder the later in the season it gets for some, especially this guy right here. But um, yeah, by all means, give it a whirl.
We'll be
We'll
watching
see.
the weather,
If
and
we if we
we'll see.
yeah, if we tag a 50, it's probably gonna be hard to leave if we know exactly where she's at. So I don't know. I don't know. It gets dark at like what, 5, so I'm sure we'd be willing to give it a couple hours into dark.
Yeah, I mean, it's not past your bedtime or anything, so
No,
it's,
no.
it just gets really cold.
Yeah.
Yeah. I already know how this is gonna go because we've had this conversation 9 million times. It's gonna be 5:15. We're gonna be like, we should go to the bar and get some food
And
and
it's like,
hang
that
out.
sounds
There's some good
good.
college football
Yeah, that
games going
sounds
on tonight
good.
that we want to watch, and
Yeah.
we'll get her tomorrow. We'll get her tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, you're
yeah, you
probably
get
right.
one whiff of like somebody's grill or something like that,
Yeah.
and your stomach starts to, yeah, all right, let's get out of here.
Oh man. Well, we can't thank you enough for coming on here tonight. It's a lot of fun. I'd love to have you back on again. I feel like we could talk. I mean, yeah, we spent a lot of time on a few different things. I feel like there's a lot more we could untap. So, yeah, can't thank you enough.
No, thanks for having me on, guys. Great chatting with you, and yeah, anytime, let me know.
Cool.
For sure.
Appreciate it,
Yeah.
Ryan.
Thanks for coming on, Ryan. If you wanna before you sign off, you wanna give your whatever to get out for guiding, if your phone number, website, socials.
Sure, sure, yeah. So my website's twincitiesmusky.com. I think pretty much all the information's there. You can email or give me a call. I get my phone numbers on there. Give me a call or shoot me a text is always good. Yeah. Then yeah, Instagram's twins or no, Instagram's Ryan McMahon Fishing. I usually, we'll try to post some catches and updates on that too. So yeah, let me know if you ever want to get out.
Yeah, I see you're drinking a big wave there. We are Muskies on tap, so I always like to shout out over drinking. That's one of my favorites. So
That's
Oh,
an
they're
all-time
tasty.
fave.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it
yeah,
looks like you're in Hawaii right now with your background. I like that. I kind of
He
a
is.
kind of a vibe right now with the big wave and the palm tree.
yeah, no doubt, no doubt. All right, well, yeah, let's do it again. This was fun.
All right. Thanks again, fellas. Take care.
All right,
Yep,
take
you
care.
too.
Bye.
You too.